something didn't add up when the Phoenix Suns benched a max contract player who wasn't injured, wasn't suspended, and hadn't publicly complained. So what had Coach Mike Budenholzer actually discovered? This past week, the Phoenix Suns made a move that sent ripples through the league. They yanked both Bradley Beal and Jusuf Nurkic out of the starting lineup. On the surface, the decision appeared tactical, perhaps even overdue. Beal and Devin Booker sharing the backcourt had created questions about redundancy and fit since their partnership began. But according to those familiar with the coaching staff's evaluation, the real catalyst for change wasn't the Beal-Booker pairing itself. It was the impact of point guard Tyus Jones on the entire offensive ecosystem. The context matters. Phoenix's opponents during the initial stretch, after the lineup change, had a collective record of 57 wins and 125 losses, a .313 winning percentage. The Suns weren't exactly navigating a gauntlet of championship contenders, but the results provided data points that the coaching staff had been seeking. And according to sources close to the organization, what they discovered went deeper than simple win-loss outcomes. The move appeared productive because it allowed Booker to reset. His season had been unusual by his standards, averaging just 24.6 points per game. Before the lineup change, his lowest scoring output since 2018. His three-point shooting had declined significantly even as he attempted the most threes per game in his 10-year career. Something about Booker's offensive rhythm had seemed disrupted. And according to people familiar with the coaching staff's thinking, identifying the source of that disruption became a priority. That's the public narrative. But according to sources close to the situation, the path to benching a max contract player reveals internal debates about roster construction, positional fit, and the unintended consequences of adding talented players without fully accounting for systemic compatibility. People familiar with the matter say the Suns coaching staff had been analyzing lineup data for weeks before making the change public. According to those briefed on these evaluations, the focus wasn't simply on whether Beal and Booker could coexist. Last season demonstrated they could. The two shared 1,111 minutes on the court together, and Phoenix was plus 136 in those minutes. Sources say that productivity provided a baseline, proving the partnership could function effectively when properly structured. What hadn't been reported publicly, according to people close to the organization, is that the addition of Tyus Jones this season fundamentally altered the offensive geometry that had made the Beal-Booker pairing work previously. Sources say the coaching staff identified a specific problem with all three guards on the court simultaneously. Someone was inevitably being pushed into a role that didn't maximize their strengths. People familiar with these evaluations describe film sessions showing how the presence of three natural guards created spacing issues and positional awkwardness that hadn't existed in the previous seasons. Configuration behind the scenes. According to those briefed on the situation, head coach Mike Budenholzer faced competing pressures about how to address these challenges. Sources say one perspective within the organization argued that Jones, as the newest addition and lowest paid among the three guards, should be the one moved to the bench to restore the Beal-Booker chemistry that had proven productive. But people familiar with the internal debates say another faction pushed back, arguing that Jones provided specific point guard skills, ball security, pace management, defensive communication that the starting unit needed, and that neither Beal nor Booker naturally supplied. What made the decision particularly complex, according to sources close to the coaching staff, was evaluating which configuration would optimize Booker's effectiveness specifically. People familiar with these discussions describe Budenholzer recognizing that Booker represented the franchise's centerpiece, that maximizing his production took priority over other considerations. Sources say the decline in Booker scoring to 24.6 points per game and the struggles with three-point efficiency despite increased volume suggested something structural needed adjustment, rather than simply hoping for statistical regression to career norms. The specific decision to bench Beal rather than Jones, according to those briefed on the matter, reportedly came after extensive film study and statistical modeling. Sources say the coaching staff examined lineup combinations, isolating which configurations produce the best spacing, shot quality, and offensive flow. People familiar with these evaluations described them identifying that Booker's effectiveness improved when he had clear positional definition rather than being forced into hybrid roles to accommodate multiple ball handlers. What hasn't been discussed publicly, according to people close to the organization, is how the front office processed this decision given Beal's contract status. Sources say there was awareness that benching a maximum salary player could create both internal friction and external perception challenges. People familiar with these considerations describe discussions about whether the move should be framed as temporary experimentation or permanent role adjustment, with the coaching staff ultimately deciding to avoid definitive public statements that might create unnecessary pressure behind the scenes. According to those briefed on the situation, the conversations with Beal about the role change reportedly emphasized that playing time and offensive involvement wouldn't necessarily decrease, that the adjustment focused on lineup combinations rather than diminished importance. Sources say the coaching staff presented the move as tactical optimization rather than performance demotion. People familiar with Beal's response describe him as professional in accepting the change publicly, though whether he embraced it privately or simply chose not to create controversy remained less clear. The timing of the move, according to sources close to the team, reflected accumulated frustration rather than reaction to any single game or performance. People familiar with the decision-making timeline say Budenholzer had been contemplating lineup adjustments for several weeks, that the change represented considered evaluation rather than impulsive reaction. Sources described this as the coaching staff reaching a conclusion that the current starting configuration had been given sufficient opportunity to develop chemistry, and that continuing to wait for organic improvement would waste valuable season time. What complicated the evaluation, according to those briefed on internal analysis, was separating systemic fit issues from individual performance variance. Sources say the coaching staff had to determine whether Booker's declining shooting percentages and reduced scoring stemmed from the lineup structural problems or represented independent slumps that would self-correct regardless of configuration. People familiar with these assessments described them as ultimately concluding that the positional awkwardness created by having three natural guards was contributing materially to offensive inefficiency, the opponent's quality during the initial post-change stretch, according to people close to the organization, created both opportunity and analytical challenge. Sources say the coaching staff recognized that facing teams with a combined .313 winning percentage would likely produce positive results regardless of lineup decisions. People familiar with their thinking described this as understanding they needed to evaluate not just win-loss outcomes, but specific offensive metrics: shot quality, assist patterns, spacing effectiveness that would remain meaningful indicators even against weaker competition. What made Jones's impact particularly significant, according to those briefed on the matter, was how his presence affected offensive responsibilities and ball movement patterns. Sources say the coaching staff observed that with Jones initiating offense, Booker could operate more as a shooting guard, which aligned better with his natural scoring instincts. People familiar with these tactical evaluations describe them as recognizing that asking Booker to function as primary ball handler while also accommodating Beal's need for touches created role ambiguity that reduced both players' effectiveness up behind the scenes. According to people close to the situation, there were reportedly discussions about whether this represented a permanent roster construction issue that might require off-season adjustments or a solvable rotation challenge. Sources say some within the organization viewed the three-guard problem as evidence that the current roster's talent, while undeniable individually, didn't fit together optimally. People familiar with these longer-term strategic conversations describe debates about whether Phoenix should explore trading one of the guards or whether creative coaching and role definition could make the current configuration sustainable. The front office's perspective, according to those briefed on their thinking, reportedly emphasized giving Budenholzer the flexibility to experiment with lineups without second-guessing tactical decisions. Sources say management understood that finding the right rotation combinations represented an ongoing process rather than something that should be definitively solved by any particular point in the season. People familiar with the organizational philosophy describe this as trusting coaching expertise to identify what works rather than imposing predetermined lineup structures. What remained uncertain, according to people close to the team, was whether the benching of Beal would prove permanent or whether the coaching staff might toggle between starting configurations based on matchups or performance trends. Sources say Budenholzer maintained flexibility in his public comments, avoiding statements that would lock him into any particular rotation structure going forward. People familiar with his approach describe this as keeping options open, rather than committing to decisions that might need revision. League-wide. According to sources familiar with broader NBA discussions, the Suns' willingness to bench a max contract player to optimize fit generated both praise and skepticism. People briefed on conversations among rival coaches say some viewed it as bold leadership prioritizing what works over deference to salary or status. Others, sources say, questioned whether the move addressed symptoms rather than root causes, wondering if Phoenix's roster construction issues ran deeper than rotation adjustments could solve the chemistry concerns from last season. According to those close to the organization, provided both cautionary tale and reason for optimism. Sources say the fact that Beal and Booker had demonstrated strong statistical performance together previously, plus 100, 36 in 1,111 minutes, suggested the partnership's potential remained viable under the right structural conditions. People familiar with the coaching staff's thinking described this historical productivity as evidence that the current struggles weren't inevitable, but rather circumstantial to how the roster had been deployed this season. What the coaching staff discovered through this experimentation, according to people briefed on their ongoing evaluations, was that positional clarity mattered more than talent aggregation. Sources say the film study showed both Beal and Booker performing better when their roles were clearly defined rather than fluid or overlapping. People familiar with these technical assessments described them as concluding that Jones's presence, while creating some challenges, also provided the structure that allowed other players to focus on their specific strengths. As the season continued and Phoenix evaluated whether this rotation change represented sustainable improvement or temporary adjustment to weak competition, the fundamental question remained unresolved. Had they discovered the optimal configuration of their talent? Or had they simply found a way to win games against inferior opponents? For the Suns, the answer would determine whether Budenholzer's tactical gamble represented genuine strategic insight, or merely a temporary solution to deeper roster construction challenges inside the organization. Sources say there was hope, but not certainty about which interpretation would prove accurate. Asterisk.
If you found this breakdown insightful, take a moment to like the video. It helps this story reach more basketball fans who care about what happens beyond the box score. For more NBA stories inspired by real news, told with depth, context, and realism, subscribe to Beyond the Hardwood. And if you want to be here when the next chapter unfolds, turn on notifications so you don't miss our next investigation. Let us know what you think in the comments. Was this the right move, or is there more beneath the surface? Until next time, this is Beyond the Hardwood.